And it just so happens that the permanent members of that council happen to be the foremost imperial powers of the last century. United States, France, Britain. And they had to include the Russians and the Soviet Union at that time, which was an empire. They had to include the Soviet Union. Why? Because it was the Russians and the Soviet Union that won the Second World War. More Russians and Soviets died in the Second World War than all of the other Allied nations combined. In one battle in the Soviet Union, the Battle of Kursk, more people died than in all of the engagements on the Western Front in Europe. One battle. The Russians paid heavily for that war because the stated objective of fascism was the destruction of the ideology of socialism, the ideology of communism. Now, whether we agree or disagree with communism or socialism, we can agree that a system that tries to provide for the whole, that a system that tries to deal with egalitarian distribution of wealth and power is a better system than one that suborns a plutocracy and the rich and the elite. So we can see that given the history of the Soviet Union and given the history of Russia, which, by the way, we can't avoid this fact, that the Russians themselves as Europeans were white supremacists. That the people in Moscow looked to Europe as their cultural, political, and social heritage. Whereas the Soviet Union was a conglomeration of subjected republics that were predominantly on the Asian massland, that were predominantly Asian, where the people were predominantly Muslim. So we know that with the breakup of this empire would come chaos. And sure enough, with Glasnost and with the winding down of the Cold War, that's exactly what happened. So this worldview that I'm trying to paint for you, I'm trying to get you to understand that we are at a certain point in history where certain things are possible and certain things are not possible. And that you as young people who are matriculating through this system, this elitist educational system, and we have to understand this is the hall of elitist education. The elite education. Poor people go to the public schools and have to empty their pockets when they go through the thing, like they're going on Rikers Island somewhere, or they go into jail. Poor people in public schools being taught that George Washington was the father of our country, and and Abraham Lincoln, and they didn't lie, and they did this and they did that. They are told on Martin Luther King Day to write about your favorite hero, and who do they have as heroes up there? They have everybody from Beyonce to Obama. Howard University is going to have a commencement speech next month, and who's going to do the commencement speech? Puff Daddy. So we are in a position where my talk to you cannot just be about, toe the line, get an education, try to be all you can be. It has to be about something a little more than that. Because unfortunately, my generation has dropped the ball. We didn't drop the ball because we didn't fight. We didn't drop the ball even because we had the wrong analysis. We dropped the ball because in many ways, we bought into the hype. We bought into the hype that reform was possible. When you get a little old and start contemplating your mortality, you start to think about reform. When you're young and you're rambunctious and you think you're indestructible, you think about revolution. You don't want to hear nothing. But as you get mature, you start seeing the gray, whether it's in your hair or in the analysis. You start seeing the gray. You start seeing the other side of the story. And I want to say this is very important. It's very important that you do not see the other side of the story. It's very important that you do not try to see the side of your oppressor of your exploiter. This is very key and very important. And the reason why it's important, because if you begin to see his side of the story, your side of the equation then is up for negotiation. So we dropped the ball because we started to say, well, let's get involved in this reform struggle. Let's organize a third party. And people like Jesse will come along and sabotage that idea, and we back to square one for another 10 years. And then we'll say, okay, let's substitute the campaign of a black capitalist, agent of finance capitalism. Let's substitute a campaign to get him in office for a legitimate movement for black liberation. So we cry crocodile tears when Obama gets elected. We think we have arrived. We say, well, I owe. We bring out our grandmother. She's crying. I thought I'd never see this day. And we think that we have arrived. We see Jesse Jackson crying on TV. And we say he's crying because he now realizes his life work has come to fruition. Jesse's crying because he's out of a job. Pure and simple. We see idiots like the senator from Arizona, McCain. I call him doo-wop shorty. If you listen to this guy flies around the world talking about how the U.S. has to arm this faction, how we have to give guns to these people and guns to these folks, that the U.S. is standing up for these people's rights. You know, the United States as an empire has always intervened in other countries for the other countries' benefit, never for theirs. They have murdered people to save them. They have destroyed cities for their own salvation. Left to Americans, they have never done anything to anybody that wasn't in their interests, or other people's interests, not theirs. We were in Vietnam for what? To give the Vietnamese democracy. The Vietnamese said, we don't want no democracy, we want some self-determination. If we decide that the democratic path, or this particular path is where we want to go, that's our business. Because they'd have had elections when the Vietnam was first, when the French first withdrew, Ho Chi Minh would have been president. Couldn't have happened. Korea, same thing. Dominican Republic, same thing. What was the pretext for going into Grenada? Same thing. We're saving American lives. In fact, they use the same pretext that Putin uses for Crimea.